very beginning for me started in Waco, Texas. I was a student at Baylor University. Any Baylorites out there? And I'd grown up singing in church and being around music. I came from a really musical family, but I didn't play an instrument. Never thought about writing songs. I'm from Oklahoma, as is Ryan and Randy Grimmett and the Okies out there. And growing up in Oklahoma, probably like where a lot of you guys are from, you know, becoming a songwriter is not on the list of professions that they give you when you enter high school. And so I didn't know my job existed, and so I didn't know that I could go after it. When I was 19, I asked for a guitar for Christmas. My mom bought me an $80 pawn shop guitar. I then bought...
What kind of guitar?
It was called a Lincoln. Nobody's probably ever heard. I'd never heard of a Lincoln.
I never have either.
The action was about 1.5 inches off the strings. I do remember that. I then bought immediately John Cougar Mellencamp's Scarecrow songbook because I already knew the album, and I thought, well, most of these songs have 3 chords in them. I can probably learn these. So that's how I started learning guitar. And for me, the next step in the process was very simple. As soon as I learned those 3 chords, for whatever reason, it seemed natural for me to write a song. And that wasn't something I even thought about or planned on. I know these 3 chords. Why don't I write something that some girl down the street might like? And so that was kind of the beginning for me. Songs happen in so many different ways. I will use a simple, dumb example. I was driving down I-440 in Nashville, Tennessee in a 1992 Ford King Cab XLT pickup truck. And I had the silliest little melody pop into my head, and it sounded like a nursery rhyme. It was so simple. And I kind of just, as I was driving, I'd just written another song, and I was on my way home, and as I'm driving home, I kind of wrote this verse and chorus just kind of in my head, and happened to have a session the next day to record a bunch of songs. Anyway, I got home, and my wife was there, and I said, is this just the silliest thing you've ever heard in your life? Is this just, I mean, what do you think? You know, as songwriters, a lot of us are always trying to create masterpieces, and we're trying to, you know, build castles, and we're trying to change the world. And I just had this dumb little song in my head, and don't know where it came from, don't know why it was there. But she said, you know, I think it's kind of cute. And so the next day, I was in the studio with a bunch of musicians, and I said, well, let's record this thing. I didn't have the second or the third verses finished, and cut it and wrote the second and third verses in about 5 minutes, standing in front of the microphone because it's a nursery rhyme. And that ended up being a 7-week #1 for Kenny Chesney and Uncle
What song was that?
called When the Sun Goes Down. I don't know if you guys know that song. But, you know, I think the point of that is sometimes something just pops into your head, and don't ever, for me, it's like, don't ever count it out, you know, and no matter how simple you think it might be, sometimes simplicity wins the day. Quick lesson for me might to be, you know, sometimes when you let it go, sometimes when you're not pushing so hard, that's when kind of God just takes over. My story is I was in Nashville real quickly. I got offered a record deal. My first trip to Nashville with Arista was on Arista for 7 years. 7 years later, all that went away. I was a failed recording artist, and I went back to medical school. And I started back to medical school on September 1st, and I was 30 years old and going to go be a doctor. But I was still writing songs. I'd given up my dream of being a songwriter, of being that's okay. I had a great shot, and it wasn't going to work out for me. September 1st, I started med school. September 4th, Faith Hill co-wrote one of my songs on the Breathe album. I ended up with 33 more cuts in that 9 months while I was going to med school every day. And the reason was because I kind of let go. I'd been in Nashville trying to push and trying to force and trying to fit what I did into their square hole, you know, or my round songs into their square hole. And, you know, when I went back to med school, I said, screw it, I got a job. You know, I'm going to be a doctor. I can write whatever the heck I want, and I'm going to write stuff I like. And I sort of let go.